easy.
Yeah.
Hey, wait.
No, I think you might be.
I don't know if the thing. I don't know if this is gonna work.
Just push them all up to the top. Volume 10.
I'm gonna put this.
Okay.
Go and sit down wherever you want to sit down.
Exciting market research. It's really transformed the industry over the past 2 to 3 years. Ever since So, so my previous company has
Hey everyone, if you can grab a seat, we're going to start in like a few minutes here.
everything about action, insights about the questions you ask, and insights yeah.
Hey everyone, if you could sit down, that would be great. We're going to start here in a couple minutes. For those of you who are new, welcome to the Park James Hotel. We're the #1 boutique, thank you, sir. We're the #1 boutique hotel in the Silicon Valley.
I'm Jack.
If everybody could, as you're taking your seats, if you guys want to move up just a little bit, it'll make it a better picture, and we can all be cozy and have fun.
Nick.
We're the #1 boutique hotel in Menlo Park. If you have absolutely nothing to do for Halloween, come join us on Halloween. We're doing boogie nights. So if you like to do the hustle, this is the place to be.
This is recording.
It'll be a lot of fun.
Just get the normal thing and put it back.
I don't know what you mean. So this must have gotten. Here, let's get. I think we got to go. Shoot, I actually don't know what to do. Let's.
Those of you in the back,
Don't
if you could
touch.
sit down and
Here, in settings.
stop
Camera.
typing, that would be amazing.
Camera.
Hey, Caesar,
FaceTime.
can you
FaceTime.
close
Just
those
let's do
doors?
FaceTime.
What?
We need to, because we don't.
Anyone know where my co-host Nick is?
Hey, he's
Oh,
right
there
here.
he is.
How can we mirror?
Everyone, we've been doing the show here for about 2 years, and when we started, there was about 30 or 40 of us every time we did this. Now we're well over 100 every single time. But Nick is such a special guy, and this is a special season. So if you could join me in singing him happy birthday. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Nick. Happy birthday to you. Real quickly, everyone, this is the general manager of the Hotel Lyle, probably the best general manager in the country.
And if anybody wants to get fitted, go and see Roxanne. Giorgio Armani is the best.
Yeah, we got Roxanne here from Giorgio Armani. All right, everyone, we're about to start the show. For those of you who it's your first time here, Nick always starts off the show and he says, "From the Bay," and then you guys are supposed to say, "and beyond." Okay? So let's just practice it one time. From the Bay and beyond. All right, perfect. Okay, well, thank you all for being here. We're gonna have a good time tonight. We've got two incredible experts, and they're gonna hang out afterwards and answer all your questions, right?
Yes.
All right, Nick, take it away.
Okay, cool. Sandra, we live? We're cooking here?
Yes.
Okay. She sounds very confident, right? That's Nick's wife. This is real. This is good stuff. All right, everybody, welcome to the 153rd episode of Silicon Zombies, where you get the best brains from the Bay and beyond. We get to demystify emerging tech with all sorts of delicious brains, and we've got Darlene Damm and David Nichols here, so super jazzed to have you both. Want to do some quick shout outs to our sponsors before we get things kicked off. Nichols builds web and mobile products. So NBCODEX, if you're looking for augmented staff, this is your team to talk to, nichols.com. And of course, Primero Negocios, which does all of our marketing. They are the growth engine. So talk to Primero Negocios and Nichols. And of course, we're super grateful to be here at the exquisitely beautiful Park James Hotel. Woo! So thanks to Park James. As we get things kicked off today, the focus is on basically technology for good and doing revenue, so profit meets purpose. So we're going to be able to dig into that. We've got a couple rock stars in the space. So Humid, without any further ado, you want to get us kicked off here?
I do. I think it's best to hear who these people are from then. So Darlene, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, brag, but not for too long. Is the mic on?
Yes, my name is Darlene Damm, and I started out my career working with nonprofits and going to places like Vietnam, Myanmar, working in villages. I worked with an organization called Ashoka, which supported social entrepreneurs for 10 years. Around 2011, I started becoming curious about how can you use technology to solve social problems. I came as a student to a place called Singularity University, which was located at NASA Ames at the time, and helped launch a company called the MatterNet. It pioneered the drone transport industry. We were looking at how do you move medical goods in places where people are walking, 9 hours. After doing that for about 2 years, I came back to Singularity and worked with startups, founders, companies, nonprofits on how to help them use technology for social challenges. And then most recently, I wrote a book about how to get a job in the impact technology sector.
All right. David, please take it away.
I'm David Hamilton Nichols. I'm a fourth generation Californian and soon to leave California actually for Florida because I've been regulated out of the state finally after 4 generations. But that said, I am an investor and I've invested in a number of companies in different sectors that are impacting the world for the better. I think that as an investor, of course, I like to make money, but it is vastly preferable to make money doing something good than something harmful. So looking at that, I look at the business model and like to see good innovative business models that are doing moonshots that'll create a lot of impact. And because of that, I've been invited to speak at a number of places, including being a panelist at the Nobel Peace Center during Nobel Prize Week on Omni-Win partnerships, solving the UN Sustainable Development Goals, been a speaker at the college university level in India on impact investing in climate change, economics, and other things. And I'm here tonight at this wonderful venue also.
Silicon Zombies.
Yes, the prestigious Silicon Zombies. So we're gonna zombie out.
I love it. Let's jump right into it. If we think about the rising tide of technology having an impact, especially in renewable tech, what does that look like for you? What are you seeing at the bleeding tip of the spear for innovation?
Well, I look at it as we are in different cycles. Obviously, there's some of the older tech, like solar's been around a while, is now being innovated. Then there is newer things that are getting into more hydrogen. Eventually, we'll see some actually credible fusion. But in this case, I personally like to look at some of the older tech and implementing it in newer ways. I'm in a company that is doing that in rural areas, bringing the renewable energy to rural America with thanks to a lot of the tax credits and so forth. And that's very beneficial for socially, because if you can get a lot of the infrastructure built there, you bring that part of the country up economically. And I also look at, as far as another company I'm in, Resource Renewables, is doing distributed generation. So it's taking, we don't have enough transmission lines in California. And they say they'll build them, but that takes 10 years. And the likelihood of that being done, is that even realistic? So if we take those and put those closer to the municipality, the end user, do small to medium-sized utility projects, that solves a problem. And it's more efficient because you don't have the transmission lines, and so you can sell the electricity for less. That's still a good margin. And you are taking, with climate change, you are eliminating some of the risks of having a huge project in maybe the desert where it might be impacted by climate. That project 20, 30 years from now might not even be viable due to climate. So you're de-risking the grid by doing that. So that's what I say, although there's a lot of new technology in that, I also like to look at how can we use the old technologies that are probably not actually that old, but use them in new and different ways.
Awesome. The question is for Darlene here. There's so many different places to start with you, but as we were talking, I'd love for you to tell us what digital twins is, because we're talking about climate change. And after you tell us, I have a few other questions about it.
Sure. So I love digital twins. A digital twin is a digital replica of something. So it could be a digital replica of this room, right? You could have data from the architect's plans. We could be connected to all your cell phones. We could have cameras watching and have information about everything happening in this room. And then you could run a simulation of what happens if 10 more people enter, or the weather gets hot, or any variable you want to change to make a prediction. But digital twins can be used for anything. You could make one of your heart. You could make one of an economy. You could make one of a city. And
could you make one of the planet Earth?
Well, actually, I've been following. NVIDIA has built a digital twin called Earth 2 of our planet, which combines information about climate, about the weather, about food, water. Imagine all this data all being brought together into one place, and then you can make predictions, maybe about disasters, maybe about your crops and food and how you should grow them.
Do you have confidence in NVIDIA?
Is
their model working?
Well, this product exists right now. Over time, other companies, Amazon, are also building digital twins, but basically the more data that they have, and if you're adding in artificial intelligence and different things, they get better and better.
So as far as you've seen, have they been able to predict a storm? What has worked with this digital twin of the Earth?
Yeah, so I actually don't know that yet,
Okay, all right.
but
We're all waiting to see.
yes,
Okay.
yeah.
And what about the narrative of using this the climate? Is this something that you're seeing as being leveraged in good ways, for bad? Is it kind of one of those where the juice is worth the squeeze on a macro level? What are you finding?
By using the climate, what do you mean?
Well, just thanks. Essentially abusing.
That's for David.
Okay, that's for you.
Don't expect her to answer.
that question's from these,
What
so
we're
don't
wondering
worry
is
about it.
how is climate change being abused? How is that whole narrative being abused?
Well, climate change is obviously something that needs to be dealt with. But as with anything, you can take something good and make something bad of it. And just as we can take anything and choose what we do with it. Now, obviously there's a lot of fear mongering around that. One of the first climate companies I invested in, I did it because they were messaging it in a positive way. And I felt like I didn't want government controlling all this and regulating all this. So let's let private industry solve this in a way that's doing some good. So that was what convinced me, originally one of the first climate companies I invested in. But yes, there's a lot of fear around it. And sometimes some people want to use it for some control. So that's something that I do see some of it.
Give a specific example. Give us a greenwashing example.
Greenwashing is actually the opposite.
Oh, it is.
Greenwashing would be where somebody makes something as making it sound better than it is. making it sound like this is a very environmentally friendly, but it isn't, and they're selling it based on that. So greenwashing is actually the opposite.
Okay. But you don't have any examples of how the whole climate change narrative is being abused?
Well, do you see all the regulation people are trying to put through?
Yeah, so is this, yeah, since you started off with you're being regulated to death, give us an example of that. How come you're moving out of the state? What happened?
Well, as a business, coming from a family that's in business, I was seeing generationally how much harder it has become to do business here in California. That's, if you were going to talk about California history, we could definitely go there because my great grandfather was here. But how deep do you want to go?
Well, give us one or two examples, like what's happening in Florida that you can't do over here.
Well, for one, you want to open a business, an LLC, you pay a lot less to that state to open that LLC. Number two, we look at our gas tax prices. There's two examples right there.
And we know that they've driven out Jason Calacanis, Elon Musk, a number of important business leaders because of the kind of calcified structure for doing business.
Agreed.
Let's focus on Darlene over here. For the folks that don't know what Singularity University is, give us a 10,000 foot level what the mission and the history is.
Sure. So it was started about 15 years ago by Peter Diamandis and Ray Kurzweil. And the idea was, how could you use exponential technologies to solve our world's biggest problems? And exponential technologies, these are technologies that fall in cost while they get better and while they get cheaper. And, they're doing that at a more of an increasing rate. So if you think about a social problem, it's huge, it's expensive, it is complicated, right? And, 10, 15 years ago, we didn't have the tools to solve social problems. And we actually have those tools now. So we're seeing this huge upswell in startups and companies and nonprofits and humanitarian organizations all using technology to tackle social problems and make a difference.
So you went from a student to a teacher. What do you teach and how to unpack that for us?
Yeah, so I've taught about how do you use technology to solve social problems. And that's working directly with startups, with corporate innovators. And I also teach about how do you build an industry? Because in the past, if you wanted to build an industry, it took 100 years. Today, it might take a few months, possibly, depending what you're using. But we still think about, how do I build a product? How do I build a company? When you can actually transform the world for billions of people rather quickly. You have to deal with regulations. You have to deal with many other pieces, so I teach about that.
So Sam Altman and some other folks talk about not the total available market, but the total available future market. What kind of data points or stories or trends in the market do you look for to say wow, in 6 to 12 months, this is going to be huge. Nobody else knows this. So what kind of things do you look for?
So one is, I think it's important to look across different technologies. I was always interested in, with a drone, the fact that people were building cameras for smartphones, where that camera is very small and very lightweight. Guess what? You can put that on a drone, and you now have a new application. Battery gets better. You can it can become a flying robot, right? So you have to look across all these different technologies.
Sounds kind of scary, flying over a little bit.
Yeah.
All right, David. So Nate, you do a lot with renewable. Can you tell us about some of the companies you invest in and what they do?
Well, I mentioned a couple of solar companies already, so if I may, I'll go to maybe some other things that are tangential like climate. Then, because I mentioned the solar companies in my other answer. I'm in a Norwegian company called Choose with 3 O's, and that is offering digital tools for businesses to offset their carbon, and also they supply sustainable aviation fuel to airlines. So that was actually that first climate company that I invested in back in 2018 that I alluded to earlier. I have done in a company that's offering data analytics and offers a lot of basically the data on companies so that people can find out sustainability solutions, and there's not a lot of data, but they're the repository for this data, and it is a company called Aluminum, and I just recently invested in. They're also a European company. So there are some things Europe is doing that are a lot of things on climate, and they're fairly forward thinking on that. But unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, they're kind of on the regulation side, which I don't like personally, but they got some great companies.
So out of every 100 companies that approach you, how many do you invest in?
I don't have an exact figure on that, but if this gives you the idea.
So less than 10, less than 5.
Yeah, somewhere around less than 5 or 10. I don't have an exact figure, but that's down there.
What's the fastest you've ever decided? Like Reid Hoffman told the Airbnb guys within 5 minutes of their pitch he was going to put in. What's your story, Dave?
I would say there have been over the years there have been some where I've been like right away. I know that that's a company I'm going to invest in.
You guys would pitch him after.
But a lot of the time, sometimes it's been 2 years after a meeting a founder before I invested in it. So one company I knew right away was a company called Ether Diamonds that's making diamonds out of carbon removed from the atmosphere. And I was in their pre-seed round back in 2020, and the founder impressed me so much in what they were doing. They wanted eventually to do graphene, but they were smart enough to know that the diamonds had sex appeal to reach the market. First, obviously, diamonds are a girl's best friend, so of course, it's got the sex appeal. But I thought that this was a brilliant idea, and the founders were credible. And then, of course, since then, they've taken, sold off their diamond division, and are focusing now on graphene and other carbon-based materials, which I thought was more personally interesting and a bigger long-term plan. But they've done that now, and they're under the name Lower Carbon. I knew immediately after I was introduced and had that first call, I would be writing them a check.
Darlene, tell us, what is your dream job is here? What is that?
Okay, so that is a book that I just published in July.
Congratulations.
Thank you. On a practical level, this is an example of all of the startups and companies and organizations that are using technology to solve problems in every industry. Food, environment, education, healthcare. And I wrote it because when I started my career, I was working for a nonprofit, which meant I had a second job so that I could work at that nonprofit. And I wanted people to know that now you actually don't have to go down that path. You can work for a tech startup that might be using satellite data to prevent deforestation, or building AI to prevent wildfires, or educating kids in a war zone, and you can be paid a regular salary, maybe have stock. So this is there's a whole revolution happening right now. And more broadly, so all of us here, we grew up during the industrial era, right? 300 years ago, in the industrial era, we exploited the planet and we exploited people to build modern society and civilization. That's how it's worked. We still think that way. But going forward, we're exploiting technology. We don't need to exploit people anymore. We don't need to exploit the planet anymore. And we're seeing that right now. Hundreds of startups and companies are emerging. So that's the message I wanted to get out there. Everything's changing. You can have this fantastic job and make the world a better place and stop all the problems that are making our lives miserable.
Are we still exploiting people?
Yes, I think we are.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
So you advise startups?
So I advise startups.
Can you tell us some of the startups you advise and what you advise them on?
Yeah, so for some startups, I've been working with them for over a decade. I worked with a founder from Myanmar, so also known as Burma, a school teacher who wanted to fix the education system there. She set up a center initially to train teachers, and then she came to Silicon Valley, learned about augmented reality technology, and launched the first ed tech company in Myanmar. And had hundreds of thousands of students. The pandemic hit, the war broke out. She had to flee the country. Her startup got destroyed pretty much. She rebuilt it, but now has 1 million students that are in a war zone and a broken country that now are getting a world-class education because of her. So that's a great example of an impact tech startup, but there's more.
Are you interested in visiting Myanmar, Burma? Have you tried?
Yeah, I was there. That's
Oh, you were?
Yeah, I was there in like 2002. Yeah.
How was that?
It was very different than Silicon Valley. When I went, there were sanctions under the country was under sanctions from the U.S. So I wasn't allowed to spend money. But you could buy food and you could pay for your lodging. But I was called in by it wasn't the official U.S. embassy, but the presence there, and I said, can I buy a T-shirt? And they're like, no. And I said, okay. But it's a country that was full of, like, when you look at the problems, poverty, healthcare, education, it's like at the top of the list for everything gone wrong. But today, people are changing that. There's still a war there, but we're seeing these sort of workarounds that are happening with tech.
I was most recently in Thailand, and the amount of refugees from Myanmar there is just insane. They all desperately want to go back to their country, but there's nothing to do there, so they're going somewhere where they can work.
Yeah.
So do you both, this is a question for both of you, and then we can open up for the audience as well, so start thinking of some questions. Do you think that from an investment standpoint, it's good to focus just on profit or just philanthropy? Can you do both? We've got a friend of the show who's a professor at Stanford University, Jonathan Burke, who says you gotta pick a lane. Otherwise, it can create confusion, a lack of a North Star. So how do you both think about this? Let's start with you, Darlene.
Yeah, so I do think you can do both. One thing that might be surprising is there's a lot of institutions. So like Vanguard, does anyone invest in Vanguard? It's a nonprofit, right? So there's actually institutions that are nonprofits. A lot of hospitals, a lot of universities that are doing just fine, and they've grown very big. And then at the same time, you don't actually have to be a nonprofit anymore. You can actually make money. You can be paid in a way that someday the companies doing most good in the world might be the most profitable. That's the dream for me. So I don't think you have to choose.
I would say that I would disagree with that professor to a degree. I think that he makes a point. There is a definite confusion between impact investing and philanthropy. I have been pitched by some people with things that you need to talk to philanthropists. You don't want to talk to an investor. There's no ROI here. Now, how I parse it personally is, does this company have a mission? A business needs a focused mission. And if that mission is solving a major problem, there's money there. You just need the right business model to get that money. And if it's a big enough problem and you have a good enough solution, you're going to make a lot of money. So I think it's having a clear mission in a particular problem that is monetizable. And as I say, I find it much more ethically pleasing and also pleasing just to myself to be doing a company that's doing something good than doing something that's harmful. So, and I would tag on since to this, because there's some stuff around ESG metrics and people love to cite this. I'm not a big fan of that, actually, because at least not for early stage ventures, because you're going to hamstring a founder when they may need to pivot if they're having to check the boxes before they've even begun their business. So, and yes, there's some businesses that are going to solve one problem, but there's other businesses that can solve another problem. So have some flexibility, have some ability to change and go for that mission that is solving a problem.
I want to ask one more question before we open up to the audience. Since you advise startups and since you invest, how often do you find yourself?
And also advise some startups too.
Of course, you're the greatest. How often do you find yourself playing a therapist for the people you invest in, where you're talking them through a breakup and stuff like that? Or do you say, I can't be involved with you personally like this, I'm just investing in you?
Well, sometimes I've had to be a therapist rather than running the company once or twice, and it's like you're doing A, B, and C, and that's going to lead to X, Y, and Z, and you don't want X, Y, and Z, and it's like, I'm like, well, and then they realize. But as far as friendships, there's some founders I'm actually fairly good friends with. Others, it's more just business. So it depends on the situation. But there's some things you just don't want to go there.
Darlene, same for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting working with impact entrepreneurs because I think a lot of your problems go away when you're trying to actually solve a real problem that exists in the world. And that, you know, it can be stressful, of course, you know, you can't raise money or, you know, all these problems can come up, but there's something about actually really solving a problem and making progress and also seeing, you know, the people you're trying to help and what they're up against that kind of is a reality check. So that is the world is the mentor.
So you're saying it's part of the process. There's no getting away from it. You're gonna have to be a therapist at one point or another.
Or the world is a therapist. You know, your work will actually solve your problems. So for me, I'm a very practical person of like, let's not dwell on all these problems. Let's actually try to change the thing that's bothering us.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, we're gonna open it up. Sir?
Hi, and thank you for the panel. Enjoyed the discussion. I was a founder of one green tech startup in the early 2000s and a member of the second. And without trying to be insulting in any way, I find a bit of this a bit patronizing. In that the first company was a utility scale solar photovoltaic company, and there was a smaller photovoltaic company. And the amount of capital required to get those companies off the ground is staggering. Just being in the right business and doing good isn't enough. And it can be very self-actualizing to be in a company like that, but it doesn't get the company to be viable. So I'm curious, as you're talking to these companies, how you address those challenges.
Yeah, I think one big thing is the world has changed in 20 years. Right, 20 years ago, it was really hard. You were one of the first people. It was almost impossible. But now entrepreneurs have so many new tools. There's even more investment available in the world. If you were going to try to solve a new problem like using, you know, quantum entanglement or something, today you would be facing the same challenges you faced 20 years ago. But today it's just, there's so much opportunity.
And I want to thank you for being a trailblazer when it was even less easy.
Successful.
What?
It wasn't successful.
And then I'm sorry for that too, but a lot of those who were early did face a lot more hurdles. And yes, there's going to be a lot of capital required. Chip is not wrong there. And that's a lot of capital required, especially the newer it is. And some people will be averse to writing those checks. Also, if in certain things, if you can find R&D money, that's phenomenal. If you can take advantage of certain tax credits in renewables, that's been very helpful too. And obviously, some of those things weren't in place before. But I would say for any startup founder, look for, obviously, the traditional sources of funding are great, but look outside the box for other opportunities and certainly expand that network. And nobody ever said it was going to be easy, but it is certainly worth it.
Next question's here.
Just your. Oh. Hello. I'm just curious on your, with all the conversations that's been happening with the advance of chips and everything else, your views on nuclear.
That's a good question.
Either way.
Well, so you're saying on the chips on how it will do nuclear, or will it progress us towards fusion? Would you clarify your question?
Just in general, that people are starting to talk more about nuclear again because of the energy capacity.
Okay, I got it. I got what you're saying. Yeah, there's definitely the data centers and AI are requiring more and more power, and that is requiring us to look at options that we had somewhat put aside, like nuclear. And I do think that that's something we are going to need to look at. Personally, I'm glad to see there have been some safety improvements with nuclear, but I'm also still always a little afraid of the potential catastrophes, because those catastrophes, if and when they do happen, are of a magnitude order multiple times higher than the other technologies. I think there are some other ways around just only using nuclear for that, and that is by relocating some of the data centers because they're into more rural areas where some of the power isn't as tapped yet, and looking at so not just putting. I know that a lot of the companies would like to have their data centers in big cities and close to the user, but we're going to need to look at rural areas for some of this as well. And then, so that's how I would say we can also focus in addition to nuclear.
Did you want to answer that as well?
Just to add, there's a really good talk by a woman named Tammy Mott, Lawrence Livermore, and she talks about why fusion is advancing so rapidly because we can actually use computers to control the ignition process. So that was like a game changer that is moving the field quicker than people might have thought.
Hi, my name is Preeti Pavnavan. 6 months ago, I moved as a head of marketing for a climate tech company, and I'm just loving it. My question is that, I see there are so many areas of investment like renewables, carbon capture, water, batteries, so many areas of innovation. What are your top 3 favorite areas of investment or advisory that you think will bring the biggest impact?
Great question. No, sorry.
Go ahead.
And were you specifically asking in climate, or are you broader than climate?
Climate.
Well, as far as climate, I like to say I'm very curious on seeing new sources of energy. I'm very curious to see where fusion goes. That's one I think will be a bit of a game changer. And Darlene alluded to some of that, how with the chips for controlling that. I also think as we get more AI, that will also accelerate our development of some of those technologies. Another one I find interesting, especially, is looking at where can we be more efficient. I know this is slightly tangential to climate, but where can we be more efficient with our resources? Because that if we used less and were more efficient to begin with, we'd be putting less output into the atmosphere. And I know that's 2, not 3, but those would be the top 2 that come to mind at the moment.
Yeah, so I was looking at, there's a website that is called the California's ISO website, where you can go on there at any time and look at our grid and see what's happening. But I looked at around 233 today, and I think we were 80% on sun and wind today. So a lot of people don't realize that California is actually using renewables a lot, especially when it's sunny and windy. But the problem is the storage piece of that. So I think batteries is a huge piece of that, or else somehow being able to move that energy around so that it's in the right place at the right time.
Next question's here, right here.
Thank you for the excellent panel. So question about, and because these are energy solutions, and a lot of it is becoming increasingly geopolitically sensitive, what do you think are the biggest impacts going forward, especially as internationally these type of producing energy becomes much more sensitive, or even primary military and strategic goals for other countries?
Well, I do think from that we have seen in Europe with Russia that Germany and Russia should have looked to being self-sufficient. This was a lesson we've already learned. And although I am in climate, I am personally think we're not done with fossil fuels in the U.S. It's still currently essential to our national security. I do think we need to be mindful and be pushing more renewables here, and a lot of the manufacturing for solar is in China. That's a geopolitical risk going forward. So we need to reshore some of that manufacturing. But energy is going to be very important going forward. It's important for AI. AI is important for defense because a lot more of our weapon systems going forward are dependent on that technology. So we need the energy. The energy is the key, which is why years ago I started investing in the renewable energy companies because I thought it was important to our national security. These companies were decentralizing somewhat the grid. And I think the grid is actually a national security risk, because if we lose power, I believe it was the DoD that did a study that said if the grid went down, we would lose, I think it was up to 90% of our population would die, and it would take 18 months to restore that power. So that's why years ago I was interested in a lot of the renewables and putting them in things like where it would be in some rural areas, and doing it also closer to municipalities. That was one factor in my making that investment, because you are right, it is definitely essential geopolitically, so we need to still, for the time being, while we're transitioning, have our own fossil fuels and keep dealing with that. And we also need to bring home that manufacturing and bring in more renewables.
Question on that. How do we bring those jobs back to the US without stoking inflation, pissing off China, and throwing us into another huge challenge globally?
Well, we've started some of that, been bringing it back somewhat already, but we need to continue. I think I think enough people are aware that that's starting to finally happen. Now, I don't think you're not going to piss off China, to use your word. But it's something that needs to be done, because there is unfortunately a somewhat adversarial relationship going on there. So it's going to piss them off, but I think we need to let those chips fall where they may.
The next question's here.
Hi, my name is James Cape. I'm president of the Intel Alumni Network, and there's a lot of comments that I can make one way or another, particularly about climate and energy. I would suggest everyone look at what the Gates Foundation is doing with small nuclear, because that's very important. And you're right, electricity and grids everything. But my question really goes back to what Mustafa Suleyman has talked about. He's the current CEO of Microsoft AI. There are 4 foundational technologies that are on the use. They're going to have a huge impact on humanity. Hopefully you guys are familiar with what Mustafa talks about. And I'd love to hear your comments, particularly you, comments about where these technologies are going. Just so I don't put you guys in an awkward position, the 4 are AI, Gen and AGI, synthetic biology, CRISPR, robotics, and quantum computing. And with that, I'll hand over the mic and stop talking.
I mean, yes, these technologies are revolutionizing everything. What is surprising to me is at how fast they're actually reaching everyone on the planet. The last couple of years, I've been working with a brilliant gentleman who lives in Uganda next to a refugee settlement, and he teaches high school kids there. A few years ago, his school was destroyed. The roof was blown off, but he put this back together. But he has access to intermittent energy and intermittent internet. His kids are learning artificial intelligence right now, and they're like, these kids are, within a few years, they want to start their own companies, their own organizations. He wants to turn this refugee settlement into an innovation center, a university. So to me, those are the stories of billions of people as they access these technologies. There's a lot of dangers, right? And things that can go wrong, but there's also so much potential and so many people that can now participate in a world in a new way.
And I think you pointed out something that's, yes, a lot of things that can go wrong, but what is the way that you're not going to prevent people from doing wrong? So how do you fight that? By having access to technology for those people who are doing good. And obviously the cat is out of the bag on some of these technologies, whether that is CRISPR, or whether that's AI, or any of the rest of it. It's going to happen at this point. And so what can we do? How can we choose to use all of this in an ethical and responsible way? That's where I think a lot of the ethics is going to be an important, obviously it's been in the philosophical back rooms for ages, but a lot of people don't necessarily think about it. But I think it's imperative we bring that to our thoughts here, because we are dealing with technologies that are wonderful and change things dramatically. but with that power comes a great responsibility. I mean, the gene editing, you can heal diseases, but you could also create designer babies, and is that something we want to deal with? And what are the ramifications of doing something so quickly? Well, we're about to find out, but we had better take care in how we do that. So that's what I have to say on that.
The next question's here.
So speaking of robotics, so we hear a lot more about robots this year in particular, and a lot more over the last few years. And, ranging from drones, self-driving cars, household robots, dog robots, and even humanoids these days. So my question is, but beyond these popular examples, have you come across any surprising new types of robots that are making impact or being developed these days? And if you have, would appreciate if you provide a couple of examples.
The only thing I have to say on that I came across a while back was a gentleman who had an artificial hand he had created originally for veterans, but he was going to bring it to also the machine use. And that hand was phenomenal. It could do more of this than a lot of hands can do, because that's a very hard motion to do. But it was with each iteration, some of those things get better. And I liked how he was taking the crossover of making it could be a prosthetic, but also be used on robots. And just to share an anecdote, I asked him, well, can it flip me off? And he said, that's the question everybody wants to ask. Veterans ask it right away, but you're the only non-veteran who asked it first. And sure enough, it could.
Yeah, a few interesting examples. There's a company that's in the East Bay called Naviair that is building autonomous boats. They're so cool, right? And there's also, if you think about the Great Ocean Cleanup, they're out in the Pacific Ocean cleaning up the garbage that's coming out of there, and they're also putting these robotic boats at the end of major rivers to collect the garbage that comes in. And there's also a company called Dendra. Do you know Dendra? They're using, they're looking at a landscape that's been destroyed, maybe by a non-invasive species or a mining company, and they're figuring out, okay, well, how do we reverse the damage? But because you have a robot that might be able to go and say a drone that could reseed things versus a human going out there to do all of the repair work by hand, they're able to think at scale. How do I use robotics to fix this huge problem quickly?
All right, we have time for 3 questions, and all 3 of the people are already picked, so.
Thank you very much, everybody. Speaking on impact investing and the ramifications of AI in general, what are some data points that you think are missing in your ongoing analysis and sustainability initiatives and otherwise, and how can we overcome this information gap?
Could you repeat that last part? I didn't quite catch that.
How do you believe we can overcome this information gap on looking into new AI technologies in impact investing or impact?
Does that make sense? You got it or no?
Somewhat.
Okay.
Well, I would say, obviously, there's a lot of things out there that there's a lot of sources of information. The problem is sometimes those sources of information aren't linked to each other. So I would say whatever tools somebody can develop that gets all those sources accessible and so that they're not siloed would be a big step forward.
I might be answering a different question than what you're asking, but I find it interesting. This is actually more what foundations are thinking about, but they're looking at how can we pay someone for completing some work. So say, for example, you don't want a forest chopped down, and you tell the community, well, if you protect that forest, we'll pay you $100,000. And then you could use satellite data to actually track that. And after a certain amount of time, you release the money based on that data.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the interesting discussion. So my name is Eddie. I'm not local. I come from Hong Kong/Australia. The reason I'm here is I got an award from Hong Kong government and to come here for 6 months to do fundraising and business. So I run a startup. We make sustainable materials to replace plastics. So I'm very glad the topic today is sustainability. We talked a lot of topics like AI, nuclear. However, so far until now, I have not heard any term like sustainable material. So I'm just wondering, because I've been several conferences and discussions, am I in the wrong place? I mean, the majority of the investors in Silicon Valley is AI, robotics, software, digital health. Should I go to Europe instead? Or I mean, so I'm not complaining, but I mean, am I wrong or am I correct, or is it just occasionally? I mean, so I'm just have some confusion.
And are you going to invest in this guy? That's the question.
I don't know.
Renewable materials.
But let me answer this question at least.
That's well, welcome here. Welcome, by the way, to the U.S. And I would say that materials are an important thing for sure. And there is you're not wrong in the importance of them being sustainable. I haven't seen many people looking at that though. And I think something that we're going to see going forward with AI and quantum computing, that's going to unlock a whole new world of material sciences. Material sciences in some ways haven't advanced as quickly as some other fields. So as we have AI taking off and quantum computing becoming a reality, the material science, that's going to do an exponential curve in my opinion. Now, as far as where investors are interested in that, you may have a good point on Europe, because Europe is a little more forward thinking on the sustainability and even on circular economy kind of things. So you might have a point there. Hopefully that helps answer your question.
Darlene, you have any thoughts on that or no?
I met a gentleman earlier who's working on sustainable bags that you can carry in the white jacket there in the back. Yes. And then I actually heard there's a lot happening in sustainability and fashion in New York. So maybe you need to go to New York City. Building materials, another good point. Yeah.
We have one more question, and then I want to ask the last two questions.
Hi everyone, my name is William Campbell, and my question is, AAA batteries and AA batteries are like the only thing that hasn't been disrupted in the last decade. How come?
Nice.
It's your final Jeopardy question.
You got a phone a friend? Phone a friend. I was on a panel with somebody who was doing battery work and changing how they're manufactured, but unfortunately I don't have his phone number. But I do think battery technology, I mean, a lot of things are rolled up and coiled. If we could get more solid state that way, I think that would be very useful. But that's the extent of what I can answer. That's a pretty good question, Darlene.
Or maybe they have. So like we don't put triple batteries in our smartphones. Someone 30 years ago might have assumed we would.
All right. In the back, Arnie, really? Oh, you have an answer to this? Okay. Somebody from the not on the panel has the answer.
Arnie, go Arnie.
So far as the battery is concerned, I used to be a very big consumer of batteries. Sanyo makes Eneloop. These are metal nickel hydride. They can hold a charge for a year. So there's been a lot of effort in that area. And not as popular. You can get them at Costco. A lot of rechargeable batteries lose their oomph in months. But these things can have 85% of their energy in 1 year. Eneloop. Sanyo makes them. So there has been a lot of effort in that area.
Thank you.
Arnie, we gotta get you on that panel. So in the back of the room, we have the first female senator of Uganda. Her name is Giovannice. You want to wave? And I know you mentioned Uganda,
Can you guys each talk about what you're doing in Africa, and if you're specifically doing anything in Uganda, that would be amazing.
Yeah, so I mentioned when I was working at Singularity University, we had chapters around the world, and one of them was led by a gentleman named Brainy Swagel, who has a school in Uganda next to the Chanwali refugee settlement. So actually my colleague Chris, who's also in the audience, both of us have been working with him for about 2 years to support his school, his innovation center, and his students.
So in Uganda, okay. And
I have a couple things I work on in Africa. To my knowledge, they're not yet in Uganda, but those might be conversations that could be facilitated. One of them is a AI data science company called Zindi that helps the talent in Africa be introduced to companies like Microsoft or Google, that kind of company, so that it's a win-win. They need talent, and talent in Africa needs those jobs so it's a win-win. Now that's one thing I'm involved in Africa. The other thing is a company that was formerly known as Africa Health Holdings, now going under the name CarePoint, and they are building the healthcare infrastructure in Africa. They've bought out and rolled up a number of clinics. They were pioneering even some telemedicine before COVID. And they're, to my knowledge, currently they're operating in Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, and Egypt. They've got, I don't know, it's like 40 or 60 plus clinics they're operating. And they're trying to be the Pan-African healthcare company, basically. So those are some, if that's helpful to you in Uganda, I can at least make some introductions and maybe see if there's anything where there could be some synergies.
So Uma's going to get the actual last question, but I want to see how the zombie community could be valuable to each of you. So maybe take 30 to 40 seconds. Feel free to plug a website, see if you're hiring, help us understand.
All right. Well, I will. Was going to say ladies first, but I'll take it then. My website is davidhamiltonnichols.com. Actually, it needs to be updated right now, but you can find me on social. I'm on all social media. I'm the only David Hamilton Nichols there is, as far as I'm aware. But it's at David H. Nichols, and helpful. If you know of any. I'm always looking for nice speaking things because I enjoy meeting people. So if you run across any good speaking engagements, keep me in mind. I'm always meeting interesting people.
Great. And for me, I'm on LinkedIn, Darlene Damm. And of course, you can buy my book, Your Dream Job is Here, The Impact Technology Revolution and the New Jobs Saving the World. But more importantly than that, I would love I know some of you are already working on startups and initiatives that are solving major social problems in healthcare, in recycling, in new materials. And so go out and do that work. And if you're not doing that work yourself, help somebody who might need your help. If we all do that, we can actually solve these problems that are around us.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Do you want to add to that?
You're just handing me the mic.
Okay.
She wanted me to hold it.
All good. Well, so thank you both for joining. It's been lovely. Let's do a round of applause for the and for more of the best brands in the Bay, check out siliconsoutheast.com. We're also going to be doing a show from noon to 2:30 in Palo Alto on Monday. So join us there, and until then, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Thanks so much, everybody. Enjoy the night.
And they're going to be here, so you can come talk to them. They're available.
Sure.
One second. Sorry.
No problem. Hey, that was fun.
I spent money.
And I showed up.
There's so much work to be done, right? You'll never get So I put my glasses on. So you have a company that is building like hardware for AI or
Yes, I am.
How you doing? Welcome.
Good to meet you. Right here.
if you're here in Silicon Valley.
Make sure with you.
I'll find out what this
Well, I think handshakes are important. Yes, I'm moving out of the state. Not necessarily at all. I get a